All right, let's get into this real quick. This video is going to be about which states in particular are going to essentially be receiving and paying out, you guessed it, a $2,000 stimulus if it actually occurs. Now, let's go into the basics of this thing real quick. If the stimulus is paid out, it could be paid out in one of many ways. It could be the federal government paying it out directly. The federal government could give it to the states for the states to distribute it as they see fit. It could be something where the IRS does something to go ahead and relieve the tax burden of those who are paying taxes. Could be a direct deposit, could be a mailed paper check, could be a prepaid debit card. It could be a lot of things. It could be something that you get back on your taxes or not have to pay from your taxes. But the bottom line is that this $2,000 tariff stimulus has a problem. And the problem is that all the money that we technically bring in on these tariffs is not enough for everybody in America to get a $2,000 stimulus, tariffy, checky thing. And so as a result of that, what you have to keep in mind is that Trump can make this promise, but he hasn't specified exactly who's going to get it yet. And that's kind of the part of this whole thing where nobody's really going into that. I haven't heard many YouTube channels or any YouTube channels actually discussing this aspect of it. So we're going to hit home because I think this is exactly the trick that Trump is using going forward with this $2,000 tariff stimulus. Now, here's the deal. There are different groups who potentially could receive it. It could be anybody, highly unlikely. Could be lower income individuals, and maybe their additional family members. So think like, think 50,000-ish or below, think 46,000-ish, $560 for a family, things like that. Could be potentially somebody, at 150% of the poverty level, think $22,590, but low income, right? We're not talking big money here. Now, middle income is kind of your $55,000 to $167,000 annually based off of the usual 2024 totals that we have to go by. So he could actually pay this out to individuals in that range. However, he's mostly limited to $100,000 or less. So let's talk about that. Will it just be for tax filers, people who worked the prior year who paid taxes? Will it be for tax filers and their family members? Well, the bottom line is this. We know that the wealthier people, middle, upper, are out. And we know that there's a lot of people who essentially exist that would be able to get a $2,000 stimulus, but he's got to narrow it down to the specifics. Let's go through that real quick. If you take basically all of the individuals, okay, who earn kind of like an annual average in thousands that are under a certain point. So let's say, for example, if you took every single worker that was more in that middle income territory that they're talking about, it could, there's no perfect absolute calculation, but it could be around 155.25 million total workers who would receive this ultimate benefit. And some states have more workers than not. So some states would get a lot more checks going their way because there's a lot more people in that, moderate or lower income territory. Now, just to be clear, if you took 155.25 million and you multiplied it by 2,000, you would need around $310.5 billion, which, to be fair, is potentially doable. Now, there's something they're not telling you in the news. They actually take all that tariff money and put it directly into the expenditure budget for all the stuff they spend money on. So technically, all that money that he's been receiving has already been spent. So the weird thing is he's going to have to come up with money some way, some fashion, some form, because it goes straight into the budget and we're running out of deficit of 38 trillion, which means, you guessed it, it's already been spent. One of the things I want to show to you real quick that I think is interesting is that if we look at every single state and we look at those individuals who are basically, in the middle-y, kind of low-y income area, right? California has 18,956,000, Texas 13,668,000, Florida 9,360,000, New York 9,620,000, and Illinois 6,145,000. So those top 5 states would have likely the most recipients of this particular tariff stimulus. I'm not saying the other states wouldn't get a good deal. There's just not as many workers in those states. So those are the top 5, right? So you got California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois. So basically, your top red states and your top blue states are all the heavy employers for your middle/low income individuals. Now, you go to the bottom of the spectrum. Let's look at the bottom 5. So basically, you've got District of Columbia, 784,000. Wyoming, well, technically, let's do the states. Wyoming has 303,000. Vermont has 323,000. Alaska, 366,000. North Dakota, 444,000. South Dakota, 456,000. And Delaware, 481,000. Those states are going to receive the least amount of checks because they have the fewest amount of people that are actually part of that particular working class. But if you add them all up, you get to around 155.25 million individuals, which is a chunk. It's a large chunk of people. And of course, if you calculate that against $2,000, you end up with $310.5 billion. Now, I know what you're thinking. $310.5 billion would be really, really amazing if distributed. However, a lot of politicians are saying don't send out a $2,000 stimulus because ... we are so in debt as a nation that we will never really get a chance to go ahead and pay it back. And they're not entirely incorrect with that. We do have to somehow outgrow/pay off our massive debt. But as you know, Trump is worried essentially about those, pesky Supreme Court justices who may rule for him to not go ahead and have the tariff power that he's been doing with negotiating with these other countries. However, recent things that the courts have been doing, it does look like they are leaning in his favor a bit based off of things that have been moving in a certain way. Now, there's another thing. There's a lot of people there. If we took that 150 plus million people and we said, okay, well, what if Trump doesn't have that much money available with this situation? What if he just doesn't have that much going on? Well, then he would have to further solidify who's going to actually get a check. So here are the most likely people who would actually get a check if all the workers under the middle/low income, under that $100,000 income limit, here are all the workers who would likely get priority to receive this check over everybody else. I know people watching this video are like, hey, give a check to the Social Security recipients. Hey, give a check to the SSI recipients. Hey, give a check to the retired people. And I get it. I totally hear you. But unless you were working, he's probably not going to give you this check based off of what he's already said. Why? Because those individuals, the Republicans tend to look for capitalism working individuals. And, a lot of disabled, obviously, and a lot of retired, obviously, and a lot of SSI recipients, they don't work. So, they're not used to paying taxes. What they're used to is that's their check. That's what they get to spend it. They don't have somebody coming in, on the next day after they receive it and going, whoa, gotta pay me a little extra. Because you're not used to getting taxed with that stuff. Some people are. Some retired people especially are. All right. So I think if he had to cut it back even more and say not just those who are receiving under $100,000 in income, he would say steel and aluminum workers would probably be a top priority. He wants to bring welding back to America in a big way because that's how you build a lot of the things we need for buildings, a lot of the things we need for infrastructure, a lot of the things we need for vehicles, including, of course, military vehicles and military ships. So I think he would probably go ahead and push that particular agenda for those individuals. He might also push basically the checks being available for automotive and heavy truck manufacturing workers, general manufacturing and semiconductor workers. He might do farmers, although that's probably, to be fair, unlikely. So I'm not really totally sure if he would include those. But if he did those blue-collar stylistic individuals, he would almost certainly be paying all the people that were Republicans. Because as you know, certain groups almost always create Republicans, right? Those are police, those are sheriffs, those are military, those are blue-collar electrical workers, plumbers. You got your welders, you got your heavy over-the-road machine operators / drivers, you got your general manufacturing, raw material handlers, semiconductor workers. Could go either way with that one. But the point is, he might actually try to curtail this to the specific industries that have a high amount of his voters. Because, I mean, what does he care? Do you think he's really going to care if he pisses off a bunch of people that are in the university marketplace where they're teaching kids about, studies that he doesn't agree with, gender studies and stuff like that? No, I don't think that's going to bother him one bit. I think if he has to cut it down as to what types of workers get it, he will release it to specifically those that are in the industries that he wants to do better, wants to have more money. So that's another thing to kind of consider with this situation that is incredibly, incredibly important. Now, you have to keep in mind too, okay, if you go through this whole thing, you have to keep in mind what he's been saying. So let's go through some of the statements, some of the quotes that have been made online, so you have a good understanding as to what's going on with these Trump quasi, tariff stimulus payments. Because remember, it might not be a stimulus in the normal sense. It might be a tax, benefit thing. All right. President Donald Trump, November 9th, quote, "People that are against tariffs are fools. We are now the richest, most respected country in the world with almost no inflation and a record stock market price. 401ks are higher than ever. We are taking in trillions of dollars and will soon begin paying down our enormous debt, 37 trillion. It's actually at 38 trillion. And technically, they're not pulling in trillions from them. It's less than that. But over his 4 years, it would be trillions. Okay. All right. Record investment in the USA, plants and factories going up all over the place. A dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high income people, will be paid to everyone. Here's the thing. You probably noticed that he put in there, plants and factories going up all over the place. This may become a stimulus that is only paid to those blue collar manufacturing workers because at the end of the day, I think truckers would be in there too. I think cargo delivery, hotshot delivery, I think all that stuff would be included. At the end of the day, Trump is trying to bolster his voting back, which means that when he comes to this midterm election thing, he wants his back strong. He wants his spine of voters very, very strong, upright, and pushing in his direction. He's not going to give a shit about people who are basically, working in industries that are unlikely to vote for him. Although, you know what I mean? There's always crossover. Sometimes you'll get a sportsman, out there with their sporting rifle, who is a Democrat. Although, again, extremely rare. It's just, let's just be honest. That's not going to happen nowadays. It might have happened like Obama era, but it's not going to happen nowadays. Next quote, President Donald Trump, November 10th, a day later. "All money left over from the $2,000 payment made to low and middle income USA citizens from the massive tariff income pouring into our country from foreign countries will be used to substantially pay down national debt." All right, so basically he's saying he's going to prioritize paying out the $2,000 to people first, but he doesn't specify exactly whom. And then whatever is left goes towards the down payment against our unfortunate national debt. And let me kind of point something out to you guys. Democrats don't give an F about the national debt. It's just they're going to spend what they're going to spend. They're going to keep raising it because they know they've got a big military, although it was ironic for them to put in a lot of policies that were not big, scary, masculine man policies. You know what I mean? The stuff that we've always used that as America. We've always been the big, scary monster. Like, let's call it is. If Russia was a bear, we were the effing dragon. You know what I mean? Like, we were the thing that everybody feared because our military just had unlimited soldiers. If you took down a helicopter, 10 the next day were coming to find you. And that's kind of how we worked it. So, to be fair, the Republicans are all about getting us financially back on track, putting limits on the spending, so on and so forth. Obviously, USAID had some good stuff, but I also had a lot of shit in it too that was just absolutely disgusting that we as Americans were spending money on it. Next quote, President Donald Trump, November 17th, 2025. "We're going to be issuing dividends later on." Doesn't say exactly when, somewhere prior to, probably the middle of next year, somewhere around midterms, a little bit later than that. So he's saying basically that he'll probably do this release of funds essentially before the midterms because he's got to play the game of boosting people to want to continue to vote for Republicans. And he's starting to get better at American politics. Let's just be clear. He is still shit all over the place for on a string, but he is getting a lot done. He is negotiating a lot of amazing international agreement deals that boost our reserve currency, right? He is cleaning up a lot of cities. He is doing that. He does have a financial plan that's better than him in his first term, Biden and Obama combined. But to be clear, right, at the end of the day, he has no idea how to fix healthcare. And you could just put on that pile Social Security benefits as well. That's just not his forte. He does not have a good plan for fixing healthcare. Healthcare is out of control. The monthly costs, the monthly fees are absolutely insane. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. You'll see. August 2025. This is what he had to say. We're taking in so much money that we may very well make a dividend to the people of America. November 10th, we're going to issue a dividend to our middle income people and lower income people of about $2,000. November 9th, this is from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. The $2,000 dividend could come in lots of forms. It could be just the tax decreases that we are seeing on the president's agenda. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, deductibility of auto loans. So essentially, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was trying to walk back the whole we're going to give people $2,000 because, you know, when you give people $2,000, it does create pretty much immediate devaluation of the US dollar because, you know, people get it, they go spend it. Then there's more money being spent, then the items that we're buying increase in price. You know, it's basic math. All right, here's another one from November 9th. Record investment in the USA, plants and factories going up all over the place. There you go. Another one from him on November 12th. $2,000 rebate would be for those making less than $100,000, but it has not been decided. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, November 12th. President Donald Trump remains committed to a $2,000 tariff rebate, dividend payment for most Americans. White House Press Secretary, again, November 13th. When we have an update, we'll provide one. National Economic Counselor Director Kevin Hassett, November 23rd. If the money keeps coming in, we're running on a surplus right now over the last few months, then I'm sure that he'll be looking into that tariff dividend check. All right, so what's really happening here is that for the first time in a long time, like Clinton time, we're seeing the country actually go into the green some months, which, to be fair, is kind of like a whoa moment. You know what I mean? Now, should we blow all that on $2,000 stimulus to everybody? Sure, why the hell not? Let's go for it. We're America. Yeehaw. Should we pay down our disastrous, unfortunate $38 trillion debt? Yeah. Here's the thing. That $38 trillion debt. See, okay, let me put it to you this way. You know when politicians get up there and give a speech about, I don't give a shit what other people think. I only care what Americans think. That's good. And that's true, but it ain't the whole truth. The whole truth is we give a very large F, a fully capitalized F, if you will, about what other nations think about us because they use our dollar to borrow money, our dollar to buy commodities, products, raw materials, all that stuff. So just to be clear, right? We care that they like the using of our dollar. If they don't prefer our dollar, then our reserve currency shrinks and our dollar massively devalues, which is bad for Americans. But most Americans don't understand how that works, so F it. Everybody gets a 2,000, right? There you go. All right, with that said, please remember to like and subscribe. Hit that like button. Some of you are shy about it, but you better get in there and like that like button. Also, I don't do Medicare stuff, so if you have Medicare questions, give them a call right here, 339-226-6287. Let them do a tune-up on your Medicare. Additional quotes. Here we go. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican. No, okay, so here we go. Basically, so it's saying, no, hold on. I got that wrong. Hold on. House Speaker Mike Johnson. So his quote is very simple. This is on November 20th, so not that long ago. We can't afford it. He's saying we can't afford the $2,000, stimulus benefit, whatever check. House Budget Committee Chairman Jody Arrington, Republican, Texas, quote, if we're bringing in revenue through the tariffs, that ought to be applied to reduce the deficit, not just making cash payments to Americans. You know what's funny about that? The people who effed up the economy were the politicians, right? Because the workers are going to work, right? The people who are working and getting paid and paying taxes, they don't really have a say in how the money is ultimately spent. Like, they don't. You know what I mean? Like, do you ever sit back and go like, well, you know what? Later tonight, I'm going to think about how my budget is going to be for those, $300 billion over there. That's what I'm going to do. No, you're a worker or you're a recipient, a beneficiary. You don't have any control over that shit. Like, the politicians control all that. So I always think it's ironic when a politician, House Budget Committee Chairman Jody Arrington, will come out and say, well, we really need to pay down, this whole deficit thing. Because, it'd be nice to help out the Americans, but yeah, we got to pay down this deficit thing. That's our real priority. Well, holy shit, Sherlock, you politicians are the ones who created that whole F up. And you want to then, take away the opportunity of Americans to have a better life. It's just, I don't agree with it. Next one, Erica York, Tax Foundation. Quote, and this is November 9th, adjusting for that, tariffs have raised $90 billion of net revenues compared to Trump's proposed $300 billion rebate. And they're not wrong. That's the problem. Trump hasn't even hit the third mark. He needs to earn $300 billion in tariffs. He doesn't have trillions before he can start making these giant promises. And remember, by the time he gets to the midterms, he's probably only going to be at around 180 billion, which means, to be fair, maybe 200 billion. That means there's too many people earning under $100,000 that he's not going to be able to pay. So he's going to have to limit that thing even more. It might be people earning under 80,000, might be people earning under 60,000, might be people earning under 40,000, might just be specific workers like aluminum welders and steel welders. Next one, Rep. Ro Khanna, Democrat, California, suggested $2,000 stimulus check for families making under $100,000 to offset rising costs. Yeah, well, why the hell do you think we have rising costs? All right, Bidenomics. We're the pinnacle of the shittiest this country has ever done financially with things. I mean, it's just a shit show of how bad could they make it. And I remember sitting there doing the videos on Bidenomics. You couldn't defend them. Like, there was no way to play the middle ground on them. You know what I mean? And I try to play the middle ground. I make fun of Trump. I make fun of Biden. I make fun of Trump. I make fun of Kamala. I did all of that. You know what I mean? But there's no way to defend Bidenomics. There's just no way. Ross Gerber, an investor, November 9th, 2025, quote, now in desperation, as the Supreme Court might reverse the tariffs as illegal, he wants to send $2,000 to everyone in America. This, as the government is shut and the transportation industry is collapsing, just create boats of inflation for no reason as we waffle in debt and deficit. And he's not wrong. Trump is doing this because he's trying to, essentially make the Supreme Court fear the people getting pissed at them because the people couldn't get their check. So he's not wrong. This is Trump's way to pinch the Supreme Court. Lake Davis, a crypto investor, November 12, 2025. Here we go. Treasury Secretary Bessent says 2,000 stimmy checks from President Trump would go to families making less than $1,000 per year. Plus, major tax refunds are coming next year. Fresh liquidity on the way. Yeah, but you know what that means. The more liquidity people have, the more they spend, the more devalued the dollar becomes, and the more increased the prices of items become. So it's a direct injection of liquidity that would actually devalue the dollar, which is what it is. Black Swan Capitalists had to say, okay, let's see. Real Don Trump, the idea of sending $2,000 stimulus checks from tariff revenues isn't just politics. It's a direct shot of liquidity into the economy. If it happens, we could see a repeat of the 2020 bull run, only much bigger this time. I don't know. That's very hopeful. Very, very hopeful. Justin Amash, November 15th, 2025, posted on X. Here's somebody that hates Trump. Trump is lying. Debt is not being reduced very substantially. It's not being reduced even a little bit. In fact, debt is increasing substantially. There's no tariff surplus. The so-called tariff dividend is simply a socialist wealth redistribution wrapped in MAGA Inc. populism. He's not wrong. Just so you guys are clear, that it's spent. That money comes in, it gets mixed with the other budgets, and it gets spent. It's not like there. You know what I mean? So when I say to you, he's got, let's say 90 billion, and then he might have 180 to 200 billion by the time they actually do this thing, that's not entirely accurate. What's accurate is they'll be spending that money already to put America into basically, for a couple of months here or there, the green. But to be fair, there's another side of this too, which is that America, for the first time in a long effing time, is in the green on some months. And that's pretty damn impressive. Like, the tariff thing is working. It's good. Mark Vietti, $10 donation. Let me put a big heart there. Maybe we can use the money to buy our politicians back. Mark Vietti with the best joke of the night. That is awesome. Yes. Maybe you can use your $2,000 stimulus to go ahead and basically buy the politicians away from the tech industry. That was the best joke of the night right there. That is so good. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling. There's tons and tons of quotes from people, but to be fair, the big problem is Trump's not going to have enough money. The money's already pre-spent. It gets mixed in with the other budgets, so that's the kicker. Remember, tariff revenue is not a segregated fund. It flows into the U.S. Treasury's general fund and then is used interchangeably with, all the other revenues and the taxes and the income tax and the corporate tax to finance all the other federal government stuff, the expenditures. So you got to remember something. It's not like he has this money. He's already spending it to basically spend on what the government already costs too much with. Okay. So I just want you to understand that he doesn't technically have these funds to spend. And to be fair, the thing is, and I mean, there's different numbers. Some people are saying he's brought in 90, 150, 200 billion, whatever at this point. But the point is, it's already been used. That's how we are in the green for some of these months. Now, let's talk about this real quick. All right. So U.S. Census Bureau says there's around 342 million people living in the U.S. I mean, obviously, nobody really knows what the hell that number is after the gates were welded open, but let's just say 342 million people. Okay. If you paid 2,000 to basically everybody, you're looking at, essentially 684 billion, an impossible amount. The tariffs don't bring in enough. Now, just to be clear, if he were to go ahead and do half of that for just the people who are under 100,000, stuff like that, it's still a mostly insurmountable number. I don't know how Trump is going to make this. I don't know how he's going to fix this. Because, all right, let's play it out. Let's just play it out. He's promising free money, which isn't really free, to Americans. Okay, so that's what he's doing. He knows that the money is technically already spent on the federal government, mixing it in with its taxes and revenue and whatever. He knows that the Supreme Court is leaning against his power to negotiate with other countries over tariffs. He knows that he can't really pay $2,000 per person under $100,000 of earned income for the year because he doesn't have the money. So think of the cluster F that he has coming up rolling into these midterms. I mean, think about how bad this is going to. He's either going to magically make this come together, or, very importantly, or he's going to really hurt the Republican Party going into the midterms. Now, all right, let's talk about this real quick. At the end of the day, this is his second administration. He wants the Republicans to do well in the midterms, because if they don't do well, he loses the House and the Senate. If he loses the House and the Senate, lame duck time, total lame duck time. So let's talk about some basic things here real quick so you kind of understand what's going on, okay? There are certain things happening with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not super totally on board with his arguments as to why he should be able to have the power of Congress to negotiate, essentially the taxes that are paid by other countries. So as a result of that situation, we're going to find out probably within the next 2 to 3 months if they pull back some of his power. Now, here's the trick with this thing. Here's the trick. Now, before I tell you the trick, please remember to like and subscribe. So many of you don't hit the like button. It makes me sad. Me so sad, hit that like button. All right, let's get into it. If the Supreme Court comes out as the bad guy and says, no, Trump, you can't do it this way. You can only do it this way. And that slightly reduces the tariffs. Then the Republicans will argue that the tariffs were reduced by the Supreme Court. And as a result of that, he can no longer do the $2,000 stimmies. And that is going to be his scapegoat. So I don't think, all right, hear me out on this. Let's say the Supreme Court argues that under the current law that Trump is claiming that he can go ahead and negotiate these tariffs on, that it's unconstitutional, it's not correct, yada, yada, yada. Well, then what happens is Trump can go ahead and essentially find a different law to back him on it. Right now, he's relying on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, but he's also stated in prior writings that there's other acts and other law that he could rest his authority on to negotiate with other countries. So let's imagine this. Let's say the Supreme Court rules, no, Trump can't do it the way he's been doing under the current law. And that slows down his ability to keep negotiating tariffs. Then at that point, he can bring forward additional law, but then he can advertise and promote and say into the news over and over that the Supreme Court slowed him down. They couldn't get as many tariffs as they needed. And now they need to either reduce the amount of stimulus that people get or not do the stimulus at all. That gives him a really, really good option to basically say, hey, the Supreme Court effed you all over. It's not my fault. Okay. Next thing, Chris Strickland. There we go. 6197. Thank you for the $2 donation. I super appreciate it. It said, I like how you keep real and you're honest. Thank you. I super appreciate that as well. I really appreciate that. Just so you guys know, I don't have any sponsors on the political spectrum that pay me any which way. Some of these other YouTube channels I watch them are like, man, there's definitely somebody paying that person to go that hard left or that hard right. But either way, bottom line, let's talk about basically some of these things. So let's say that the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling over the next 6 months. That puts us into getting closer to midterms. There's still another, 6 to 9 months in there. Trump would need a scapegoat. Now, there are other scapegoats available. Let's say that there was some sort of massive snow event that messed up a bunch of stuff. Let's say that there was some massive, horrible war event that occurred. Let's say that there was some new disease problem. Let's say like food became diseased or meat became diseased, or there was some sort of swine flu or chicken flu or, swan flu, whatever. There's obviously whatever. But the point is, let's say that the food became more scarce and all of a sudden the government had to find a way to subsidize Americans so that they could afford the food by paying the farmers extra money to somehow magically work extra hours to create more food. There's all these options that Trump could use to get out of this $2,000 stimulus situation. And here's the thing. Here's my take on it. Trump is aware that the American people, they don't really have a ground level understanding of how economics work. And at the same time, most of them don't understand the complexity of the international relations that we have. And that's fine. That's not mean to say. It's extremely complex. It's not mean to say that. So with that said, if he can promise something, but not come through with it because something else clearly stopped him, that he can promise it down the line again. Okay, hear me out. You have Trump's second presidency, right? The Supreme Court's giving him shit. So he makes this promise about a $2,000 stimulus. Then we get over to here, the midterms. Something could mess it up right over here. He's got a scapegoat, and all he's got to do is say, you know what? We're still going to do it. We're just going to do it at the next rotation or at the end of the next 2 rotations, which puts you right at the next presidential election. So that's what Trump is probably looking at. He's saying, look, if I can't make this come together, I'll just say I'm going to do it in the next year or the next 2 years thereafter. And having a $2,000 stimulus directly before the next presidential election, that puts him in the driver's seat. That puts him in a very, very good spot. Now, I do believe that there is one thing that's sitting on Trump's mind that, nobody's really thinking about. And that's that a lot of states that employ people are blue states. And Trump is not a big fan of blue states for obvious reasons. So, if he can find a way to cut the blue states out of these checks or find a way to reduce what the blue states get, he's going to do it. He might put a cap on how many people can actually get it per state, which is mostly going to hurt blue states. Because, just to be fair, New York, California, they're biggies. I'll just let me go. I'm going to go down the list of the biggest states. That way you have an understanding as to who would benefit the most. Some of them are Republican, but a lot of these are Democrat-oriented states who are going to receive the most potential from this $2,000 stimulus. California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, Washington, Michigan, North Carolina, New Jersey, Virginia, Massachusetts, Indiana, Wisconsin, Tennessee, Arizona, Minnesota, Missouri. And that's the top 20. That's the top 20. And most of those are blue states. So he's paying stim checks to basically people in blue states. Now, some of you are already thinking, well, if he doesn't pay out the full amount, and it's just more money will have to go to the blue states with this. But if he doesn't pay out enough money to these blue states, won't it piss people off? Yeah, I'm sure it will. But, at the end of the day, I don't know how convinced Trump is that he needs. Okay, you have to understand something. Every time I look at essentially the MSNBC, the CBS, stuff like that, they are hard pumping that he is the most, unpopular president in the history of anything that ever existed, right? That's what they're hard line pumping. But to be fair, I don't think that's accurate. And here's my reasoning for that. I have seen a lot of the numbers, if you will. And if you just look at the legacy news numbers and you look at the social media influencer numbers, the amount of people watching legacy news, the amount of people watching Fox and stuff like that is it's more than all the other legacy news channels combined. If you look at the influencers that are like, political influencers or whatever, the amount of political influencers that have views on the Republican side is absolutely massive, which is interesting too, because technically the way somebody became famous, like, they'd release an album or they'd have a movie or, they'd do a play back in the old days, it was actually the white female population that would technically upvote them into, stardom. If you go look at some of the early Disney actors that grew up a little bit, they would all say the number one way to become famous is not through males. It's mostly through white females. Those were the ones that would constantly replay their track, go to their concerts, do a bunch of that stuff. And that's how you create it. Now, obviously, white females, there's a very high percentage of those individuals that are very woke, that are very Democrat oriented, which, don't get me into fertility rates, but you know what's going on with that. But the bottom line here with this is, it appears, and I don't know what the exact, whatever. I mean, look, you got the Tate brothers, you got Nick Fuentes or whatever his name is. You got those types. They are extremely popular. Extremely popular. I mean, look at who just took the number one spot. You saw what France is potentially doing to her. So the point that I'm getting at is I don't trust these news media groups anymore. I tend to trust, who is essentially the most viewed. Now, some of these channels use bots from China. They do. But to use that many, it's just too many millions upon millions of viewers. It's just so my point to you is this. I don't believe that Trump is unpopular right now. In fact, I think he's frankly growing in popularity. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of the reason why he's become more and more popular is that he somehow is doing these things culturally, ethnically, that makes sense to people who normally would not vote for him. Backing and supporting the Christians in Africa, where there's a Holocaust going on. He's getting a lot of credit for that. you know. It's I guess what I would say is this: he's being active in ways that people didn't really expect. I didn't expect it. Maybe you did, but I didn't expect that. So I think, yeah. See, 76 Mothers of Invention put Tucker, Sean Ryan, and they got zillions of viewers. Oh my goodness. Just a ton of viewers. And so, like, my point to you is, at the end of the day, oh my goodness. And so, Smarter Than You says, Walter, you are a moron anymore. I lost trust in them 20 years ago. Yeah. I'm not talking about having trust in them. I'm talking about, which, thanks for the moron comment. What I'm talking about is people love them. People like their ideas. People en masse are basically going in their direction. So again, the person who called me a moron, the argument is not whether I'm a moron for believing that they're correct. The argument is, does the majority of people follow, Tucker Carlson, Sean Ryan, stuff like that? And those people absolutely do. They get just magical numbers. So I guess at the end of the day, what I would say is this. Look at this. Jibs 5K said, stick to SSI lawyer and bro. I don't represent SSI people for the most part anymore. Every single SSI claimant that I represented in 2025, we lost hundreds. Some we lost thousands. One we lost $7,000 on. So I don't really take SSI claimants anymore, to the person who's trying to be mean to me named Jibs 5K. So just to be clear with that whole thing, after Bidenomics, I could not afford to help the SSI people like I used to. I still help some of them at the homeless office that I go to on Wednesday. And it's always amazing. You get shit from people that don't help people. I've never seen anything like it. I wish I'd known that when I was younger. But the people who are mean to you don't do shit for society. They're just judgmental little pricks. They're little babies that waddle around with their diaper filled, who can't figure out how to basically help themselves, let alone help other people. But that's the people who, they take a hammer to you and they say, you're this, you're that, whatever. The point is, okay, the point with this whole situation is, just to be clear, Trump, there's no way he's decreasing. The viewership for the people that are part of his whole thing are massively increasing. Now, granted, you're going to have individuals, the multicolored hair, the, 5 different genders, the super Islam and, the women screaming, down with America, all that, all that stuff. They're never going to be pro-America. Like, you know what I mean? It is what it is. And some of them, they move the goalpost, and some of them, to be fair, like, they burn the goalpost down and just hate America because they hate America. They're never going to be supporting America. But the amount of people who have become very pro-America that they call the far right, which I don't know. I mean, when I think of far right, being that I am of Jewish descent, being that my family members had to flee from Europe, specifically Ukraine and Austria and Germany, to get away from what was going on. When I think of far right, I think of, essentially the socialist, party of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. That's what I think of as far right, which to me has more connections to a lot of the stuff that's being done on the left right now, which saddens me because I always think of myself as a pretty liberal person because I'm trying to help people all the time and try to help the homeless, and I work with them. And the homeless, they have a shit show worth of legal problems every single way. And you know what amazes me? I'm just going to say one last thing about the homeless, because I don't think a lot of people know this about them. And I think that this would do a service to people if they knew this about the homeless. The homeless, you think that a lot of them are that way because they're abusing alcohol, drugs, marijuana, things that they smoke, stuff like that. And there is that. Absolutely, there is that. However, one of the high percentage items as to why they remain homeless is because their family members, when their parents die, do not allow them to collect any of the inheritance. So let's say that there's 3 daughters. One of the daughters becomes homeless. Could be for any reason. Could be drugs. Could be that the husband left her and she never had an education, didn't know what to do. She had PTSD from her child passing, whatever reason, right? For some reason, in these situations, those two sisters will completely fight over who gets the parents' estate. And the third sister, the homeless one, will be completely left out and effed over. Every single time I go to the homeless center, I run into somebody new and different who is screwed over by their family members when it comes to their inheritance from their parents. That is something most people don't know. That is something most people don't understand. Now, to be fair, I will say this. I used to think that these parents were just being idiots about setting up trusts, or rather, the lack of setting up trusts. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the person who becomes in charge of the trust is the trusted child. And then the trusted child does a little bit of some illegal shit and then kicks the homeless person out of the equation because they don't want the homeless person to live in the house. Because if the homeless person lives in the house, they're not going to want to leave. And if they don't want to leave, then they're going to have to force a sale on the home. And then everybody gets their equal distribution or whatever distribution they were supposed to get in the trust. That's a horrible thing. And I just want to say to you, if any of you have, a homeless brother, sister, cousin, and you don't trust them and you don't want this, you don't want that, or you don't want to do this, or you want to keep it all for yourself, just remember at some point you're going to go somewhere when you die. And if you hoard all of that, I guarantee you it's going to be a place that you don't like, because that person suffers an incredibly large amount. The rest of their life, they suffer while it could be you, could be one of those potential people who took too much from the parents' inheritance. They suffer so much. And it's sad. It's sad because you see them there, they're overweight, they're covered in rashes, their teeth are missing, they're miserable, they're covered in bug bites, their clothing doesn't fit, they're chewing on a donut because that's all they had to donate that day to, for food or whatever. Sometimes they have more than that. They just got a shower if they're lucky and they got there early enough. It's just don't do that to them, because I'm telling you, when you pass away, if you're going to go somewhere, you're going to hate it. You're going to hate it because the thing you do to that family member. And the weird thing is this. I understand most family members, and this is my final point on this, and then I'm getting off this. This is my final point on this, okay? This is my final point on this. Most family members have given up on that family member that becomes homeless, because the homeless family member is like, can I have some cash? Can I have some cash? Can I have some cash? What are you using it for? Are you using it for drugs, for your pain? Well, if you are a parent and one of your kids is a shit show, put it in the trust that certain funds or certain house or certain housing or a certain plan is to be used for that kid. You might have given up on that kid, and that's fine. It is what it is. You get to make the choice, but have a plan. Even if the plan isn't great for the person, have a plan. But have a plan, because if you're going to make a plan, I guarantee you're going to make it better for that person. I guarantee it. Even if it's not a great plan for that person, it's going to be better than what your kid, the chosen child who becomes the trustee, I guarantee you it's going to turn out better for that person. Every single week that I go to that homeless facility, a new person with the same problem every single week. Don't do that to them. You don't need to do that to them. You just don't. You don't. And you know what? You know who this especially happens to? You know who F's over those other family members that are homeless? Other disabled children F over that family member who's also disabled and homeless the most. I see it every time that if there's a disabled family member, that's the kid, and they become the trustee or they inherit or whatever, and they're supposed to distribute funds appropriately. Man, that's the first FU that goes to the homeless family member. The homeless kid comes from the disabled person. I see it over and over again. And that's not good. And I get it. You're disabled. You don't have income coming in that way. You want to make sure you're solid. I get it. But I'm just telling you, when you pass, if you pass one day, you know, unless they magically make people live forever, I'm just saying you're going to go to a shitty place if you F over your family members. I'm just saying that. You wouldn't believe this final comment. Most of you will fail at trying to save people who become homeless. Most of you will. There's no doubt about it. You're going to fail with most of them. But there's going to be one that makes it. It's such a good feeling. It's such a good feeling. And you know what the weird thing is? The longer you do it, you don't think about all the people that failed because you know that that's their thing too. It's a shared thing where you're trying to get them over the bridge. But that one person that makes it, oh, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Sometimes they make it because of religion. Sometimes they make it because they get an inheritance. Sometimes they make it because, honestly, especially for women, they get abused and beaten so much that something resets in them and they're like, I'm not going to go that route anymore. And finally, you can move a person who's using and abusing anywheres. You go to Alaska, somebody's got it. Somebody's got drugs in Alaska. Okay. Somebody's got drugs in the Arctic Circle. Somebody's got drugs in the triangle of death. Somebody's got drugs literally on the most uninhabited island on planet Earth. You move somebody anywhere, there's always going to be that there. You got to beat the thing that's keeping them down. Anyways, I'll catch you all later. You have an amazing, amazing night. I have one additional video which has some really spicy stuff in it. We're going to do that in about 5 to 10 minutes. I will catch you there. Please remember to like and subscribe. Head over to Google, type in Disability Resolution Law Firm or Disability Resolution Florida. Throw some stars up there. I don't do Medicare stuff. Give them a call if you need Medicare help. And finally, I will catch you in about 5 to 10 minutes for the next video. All right, let me put the URL in the chat. We'll rock and roll from there. Attorney Walter Hnot, thank you so much.